Welcome to True Crime Audio Pod, where we unravel the threads of the most disturbing true crime stories. In today's story, we explore a case that began in a quiet Florida town and ended with a shocking crime that left 2 lives lost and a community searching for answers. It's a tale of investigation, justice, and the ripple effects of tragedy. On Sunday, October 30th, 1988, in Palatka, Florida, a sense of foreboding filled Putnam County Sheriff's investigator Chris Horde the moment his phone pierced the stillness of his day off. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday, the single day of the week he could disconnect from the relentless grind of homicide investigations. For 24 hours, he was a husband, a father, a man allowed to breathe without the shadow of crime hanging over him. But the sharp ring of the phone shattered that illusion, yanking him back into the grim reality of his work. Murder was calling. Horde's gut told him something was wrong before he even answered. He picked up the receiver to hear Detective Chuck Whaley on the other end, his voice tense, the kind of tone that came from years of confronting the unthinkable. Whaley didn't waste time on pleasantries. He was calling from a mobile home in a trailer park on the outskirts of the city, and his news was as dark as the autumn night outside. "We've got a male victim and a female victim," Whaley said, his words clipped, urgent. Both appear to be in their late 20s or early 30s. They've been shot. The man, naked, is stretched out on the bed in the bedroom. The woman is seated on the couch in the living room. Except for a sheet on her lap, she's also naked. The macabre scene unfolded in Horde's mind as Whaley spoke, the grim details painting a picture he had seen variations of too many times before. Naked bodies. Gunshot wounds. A trailer park under the harsh glare of emergency lights. Somewhere, a killer was out there, and Horde knew his Sunday respite was over. He grabbed a pen and quickly jotted down the address, the cold efficiency of years on the force guiding his hand. There was no time to dwell on the implications. Within minutes, he was out the door, his vehicle roaring to life as he sped toward the trailer park. Arriving at the community of 50 or so mobile homes, investigator Chris Horde had no difficulty locating the crime scene. The cluster of sheriff's vehicles parked in front of a gray and white single-wide trailer stood out like a grim beacon at the end of one of the quiet roads. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area, fluttering lightly in the breeze, while Detective Chuck Whaley waited alongside a man who introduced himself as the neighbor who had called the sheriff's office. The tension in the air was palpable, a heavy silence broken only by murmurs of officers at work. Whaley quickly got to the point, identifying the occupants of the trailer, 28-year-old Darrell Durbin, 30-year-old Mary Cheshire, and Mary's 2 sons, aged 12 and 6. The neighbor wasted no time sharing what had drawn his attention to the tragedy unfolding just across the street. "I was awakened around 2:30 this morning by what sounded like a car backfiring," he began, his voice uneasy. "A few minutes later, I heard a woman scream and then the same sound again. Only this time, it was clear, it was a gunshot. The sounds came from across the street, from the Durbin trailer, so I got up to check. But when I looked over, everything seemed quiet. I thought maybe I'd been dreaming and went back to bed." He hesitated, glancing at the taped-off crime scene before continuing. "Then this morning, my wife told me she'd heard the same thing, gunshots. That's when I knew I hadn't imagined it. I looked out again and saw Darrell and Mary's cars still in the driveway, but no sign of movement. That wasn't like them." The neighbor's curiosity had gotten the better of him. "Shortly before 1 o'clock this afternoon, I stepped outside to take another look. That's when I noticed all 4 tires on both cars in their driveway were flat. Something felt off, so I decided I'd better call the sheriff's office." After listening carefully, investigator Horde thanked and released the neighbor. Detective Whaley picked up where the neighbor's account left off, filling him in on the grim scene inside the trailer. Deputy Dwight Parker had been the first officer to arrive. When Parker got here, Whaley explained, he found the plastic panel on the mobile home's front door broken. The door itself was unlocked. He went inside, found the two bodies, and immediately called me. I arrived soon after, took his report, and released him. We've got officers canvassing the trailer park and surrounding area, interviewing everyone they can find. Good, Horde replied curtly, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. I'll do a quick walkthrough of the trailer. The moment he approached the entrance, Horde's sharp eyes caught the faint outline of a fresh shoe print in the dirt near the door. It was large, unmistakably a man's, but the impression was delicate, easily disturbed. He filed the detail away and stepped inside, bracing himself for what awaited. The trailer's interior was eerily still, the silence amplifying the horror. In the living room, Mary Cheshire's body slumped on the couch, naked except for a sheet draped over her lap. Bloodstains framed the wound that ended her life. In the bedroom, Darrell Durbin lay sprawled across the bed, also naked, his lifeless body bearing similar evidence of a fatal gunshot. Horde's trained eyes scanned the room, cataloging every detail. Shotgun shells were scattered across one area of the home, but no firearm was in sight. The door's broken panel and the absence of weapons made one thing clear: this was no murder-suicide. Someone had come here with the intent to kill, and that person had left no obvious answers behind. Horde called the medical examiner's office, ordering the removal of the bodies for autopsy, then reached out to Major David Stout, instructing him to bring the mobile crime scene unit to process the area. He pointed out the shoe print near the door, knowing its faintness might pose a challenge. It's pretty faint, but I hope you can lift it, he said, his tone resolute. With the immediate matters addressed, Horde's mind turned to the next steps. The quiet streets of the trailer park stretched out before him, and he resolved to head to the park's office on the next road. If anyone there had seen or heard something that could lead to the person responsible for the carnage inside that trailer, Horde would make sure he found out. As investigator Chris Horde prepared to leave the crime scene, fate seemed to intervene. The trailer park manager pulled up in her car, her expression shifting from confusion to concern as she stepped out. I'm afraid to ask what's happened, she said, her voice tinged with dread. Horde didn't sugarcoat it. Darrell Durbin and Mary Cheshire have been shot to death, he said flatly. The woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, my God, she exclaimed. When did it happen? Likely sometime during the night, Horde replied. The park manager shook her head in disbelief, visibly rattled. I've been away from the property since mid-morning, she explained. I went to St. Augustine for lunch with a friend. This is unbelievable. Horde studied her for a moment. I was actually just on my way to your office to talk with you, he said. She nodded quickly. I'll meet you there right away. True to her word, the manager proved cooperative, offering whatever information she could about the victims. She told Horde that Darrell Durbin had moved into the mobile home community in July of 1987. Like most residents, he owned his trailer and paid only a monthly lot rent. He's always paid on time and never caused any trouble, she said. He lived alone up until about 6 weeks ago. That's when Mary Cheshire and her 2 boys moved in with him. They were planning to marry as soon as Mary's divorce became final. Horde raised an eyebrow. Mary was in the process of a divorce? Yes, the manager confirmed. She filed for it about 3 weeks after moving in with Darrell. Over in St. Augustine. Why file there instead of here? Horde pressed. That's where she and her husband are from, she explained. Apparently, they both have family there. The mention of Mary's husband piqued Hord's curiosity. Has her husband caused any trouble here? The manager frowned slightly, choosing her words carefully. Mary told everyone he doesn't know where she is. As a matter of fact, I was surprised to see her car parked at Darrell's trailer when I drove in earlier. She usually parks it way in the back, on some vacant property, to keep him from spotting it. She was worried he'd track her and the kids down. Where are the two boys now? Hord asked, the question as much for clarity as it was out of concern. They're supposed to be spending the weekend with relatives in St. Augustine, the manager answered. Hord nodded, filing the detail away. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they painted was far from clear. A pending divorce, a hidden car, and a husband who allegedly didn't know where his estranged wife was. There were too many questions and not nearly enough answers. For now, the investigator could only hope that the trail wouldn't go cold before they figured out who had brought death to this quiet trailer park. Investigator Chris Hord shifted his line of questioning to the victims' former places of employment. The trailer park manager responded without hesitation, naming a manufacturer of extruded aluminum parts in St. Augustine. They both worked there, she said. Darrell had been with the company for several years. I don't know how long Mary had been employed there. She paused for a moment, her expression softening with thought. You know, I didn't know Mary that well, she hadn't been here long enough. But I feel terrible for what's happened to Darrell. He was such an upright young man. Always taking care of his own responsibilities and even other people's when needed. He did everything right. But... She hesitated, her voice tinged with sadness. He never really had much happiness in his life, not until Mary and the boys came along. Her words hung in the air for a moment before she continued, her voice heavy with emotion. He really loved them. You could see it, how much they meant to him. That was wonderful enough, but something even more wonderful happened for him just last week. Darrell was adopted as a small child, and he'd spent so much of his life trying to find his biological father. Well, just last week, he found him. His father was living in another state, and they arranged to meet. When Darrell came back, he was over the moon, happier than I'd ever seen him. And now... She trailed off, shaking her head. It's such a pity. The poor guy no sooner grabbed a balloon than it went and burst. Hord absorbed the information, the bittersweet story adding a new layer of tragedy to an already grim case. But his mind stayed focused on the task at hand. I'll need to notify next of kin about the deaths, he said. Can you help with any information for that? The manager nodded. I can give you the address of Darrell's adoptive parents. They're in a city not too far from here, in Central Florida. But I'm afraid I can't help with Mary. I don't know anything about her family. With that, Hord turned his attention back to the scene, taking stock of the progress made by the officers conducting neighborhood interviews. The reports trickling in added little to what he already knew. The most significant detail was that the victims had last been seen alive at around 7:30 the previous evening. Beyond that, the interviews largely mirrored the information the park manager had already provided. Before leaving the property, Hord made a mental inventory of the key threads he now had to follow: Darrell's adoptive family, Mary's divorce, and the possibility of a jealous or vengeful estranged husband. Each thread carried the potential to unravel the mystery, or lead to another dead end. Investigator Chris Hord wasted no time upon returning to headquarters. He immediately reached out to the Putnam County Sheriff's Office in St. Augustine, requesting assistance in gathering information on Mary Cheshire and tracking down her estranged husband. Given Mary's ties to St. Augustine and the ongoing divorce proceedings, the potential connection to her husband loomed large in the investigation. By Monday morning, Horde was at the medical examiner's office to attend the autopsies of Darrell Durbin and Mary Cheshire. Dr. Robert McConaughey, who conducted the examinations, began with Darrell. Cause of death is a single fatal gunshot wound to the chest, McConaughey explained. There's stippling and powder markings on the skin, which indicates the shot was fired at close range. However, the wound itself is not typical of a contact wound. Horde listened carefully as McConaughey detailed his findings. The spread of pellets after impact was significant. The medical examiner was able to recover 4 pellets along with a cardboard wad from Darrell's shoulder and right side. The evidence suggested a violent, concentrated blast delivered at a range that still allowed for some dispersion. Turning his attention to Mary Cheshire, McConaughey revealed a different, more agonizing scenario. Like Darrell, Mary had died from a single gunshot wound, but her death had not been instantaneous. The first part of her aorta, the trunk artery that carries blood from the heart to the rest of the body, was completely blown away, McConaughey explained grimly. The victim must have hemorrhaged to death in a gross fashion. I'd estimate she pumped out blood for several seconds before succumbing. Horde pictured the horrifying scene as McConaughey continued. A plastic wad was removed from Mary's body, leading the medical examiner to conclude that she had been shot from a distance of approximately 5 to 6 feet. The shells recovered at the scene suggest a 12-gauge shotgun was used in both killings, McConaughey noted. With both victims showing no signs of decomposition, McConaughey was confident in narrowing the time frame of the murders. The absence of decomposition indicates they were killed sometime between 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, the last time they were seen alive by residents of the trailer park, and 1 p.m. on Sunday, when their bodies were discovered. The examiner concluded with a chilling observation. I believe they were killed within minutes of each other, McConaughey said, leaving no doubt that the murders were deliberate and methodical. Horde left the medical examiner's office with a clearer picture of the brutality of the crime. The forensic evidence reinforced the theory that the killer had acted decisively, firing at close range and ensuring both victims had no chance of survival. Now, the timeline was tighter, and the hunt for answers, beginning with Mary's estranged husband, took on even greater urgency. After leaving Dr. McConaughey's office, investigator Chris Horde turned his focus to piecing together the details of Mary Cheshire's tumultuous relationship with her estranged husband. His first stop was the St. Johns County Courthouse in St. Augustine, where he reviewed Mary's divorce petition. Filed on October 11, 1988, the petition painted a chilling picture. Mary had cited physical cruelty as the grounds for divorce and explicitly requested that her husband, Stephen Cheshire, not be informed of her whereabouts. The petition clearly stated her fear of him and what he might do once he learned she was seeking to end their marriage. Armed with the information from the courthouse, Horde obtained the name of Mary's attorney, a woman practicing in Palatka, and made her office his next stop. The attorney, visibly shaken by the news of Mary's murder, was forthcoming but cautious in her responses. When Horde asked if she thought Stephen Cheshire might have been involved in the killings, she hesitated before answering. I don't think you'll find that Stephen had anything to do with these killings, she said firmly. For one thing, he genuinely didn't know where Mary was living. She made sure of that. And for another, he has a girlfriend now. He was probably halfway pleased that Mary was filing for divorce. Horde leaned forward, his tone probing but measured. Do you happen to know who the girlfriend is? The attorney nodded, providing the woman's name and address. What she said next added an unexpected twist. Oddly enough, That address isn't far from the trailer park where Mary and her boys were living with Durbin. Horde filed the detail away, the coincidence raising more questions than answers. Before leaving, he asked the attorney to elaborate on the Cheshire's relationship. They were together for 6 years, she began, her tone reflective. When they started living together in December of 1982, Mary already had a 6-year-old son from a previous relationship. Later, she and Stephen had a son together. But they didn't marry until 4 years after they started living together. She paused, then added, whatever else one might say about Stephen, he does love both of those kids. The picture was becoming more complex. Stephen Cheshire's alleged ignorance of Mary's location, his relationship with a new girlfriend, and his professed love for the children all painted him as an unlikely suspect. But the proximity of his girlfriend's residence to the murder scene raised a troubling possibility that couldn't be ignored. Horde left the attorney's office with a growing list of leads to pursue and the unsettling realization that the case was far from straightforward. Upon returning to headquarters, investigator Chris Horde was met with an unexpected development. A night shift patrol deputy, who had come in early, wanted to share something that might be relevant to the case. After briefly acknowledging the double homicide, the deputy got straight to the point. I don't know whether this is important or not, he began, but I happened to see Steve Cheshire driving past an intersection near the trailer park where his wife was living with her boyfriend. It was about 2 hours after midnight on Saturday. Horde raised an eyebrow, curious. It's pretty dark out there at that time. How could you be sure it was Cheshire? The deputy didn't hesitate. For one thing, you can't miss the vehicle he drives. He went on to describe Cheshire's vehicle, a distinctive old yellow Department of Transportation pickup truck. For another, the deputy added, I just happen to know Steve. Horde nodded, taking it in. This information may or may not be significant, he said carefully, but it's worth noting. I've just learned that Cheshire has a girlfriend who lives in an area near the trailer park where the murders occurred. It's possible he'd been visiting her. Did you happen to note the exact time you saw him? The deputy nodded. It happens I did. You know how it is out on the road, you're always checking your watch. It was exactly 1:53 a.m. Horde thanked the deputy for the tip, acknowledging its potential importance. The time fits within the window when the murders were committed. He could have been doing nothing more than driving home, but then again, it could be more than that. I'll look into whether he visited his girlfriend that night. After the deputy left, Horde wasted no time. He quickly located Stephen Cheshire's girlfriend and arranged to meet her for an immediate interview. The woman, cooperative and forthcoming, confirmed that she and Stephen were in a steady relationship. She also confirmed that Stephen had visited her house about an hour after midnight on Saturday. It wasn't unusual, she said. He's stopped by at odd hours before. Horde studied her carefully. Did he give any reason for dropping by? She shook her head. No, not really. He didn't stay long, either. But I did notice he seemed restless and upset about something. I don't know what it was, though, he didn't say. Horde pressed for details about Stephen's appearance. The woman described him as wearing a plain t-shirt, jeans, and loafers. Though the visit seemed unremarkable on the surface, the timing and Stephen's demeanor raised further questions. Horde noted her answers meticulously, aware that even seemingly innocuous details could prove crucial. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, but the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. The investigation into the brutal slayings of Mary Cheshire and Darrell Durbin took a sharp turn when an investigator from the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office informed Chris Hord that Stephen Cheshire had failed to show up for work on Monday morning and hadn't been seen at his home since Sunday night. Adding to the intrigue, the St. John's investigator provided a list of Stephen's relatives in St. Augustine, highlighting one with whom Stephen shared an exceptionally close bond. "He's the one the two boys were spending the weekend with," the investigator explained. Stephen visited the boys there. It was the first time he'd been allowed to see them since his wife took them and left. "I understand the visit left him pretty upset." Hord requested the relatives' contact information and wasted no time initiating a phone call. In the ensuing conversation, the relative revealed unsettling details about Stephen's visit with his sons on Saturday. The boys told him their mother had taken them to live with another man and was trying to make them call this other man daddy, the relative explained. They also described the place where they were living, a trailer park. Stephen got terribly upset. "I don't think he knew Mary had moved in with another man until they told him. But that wasn't the worst of it for him. He was absolutely infuriated about the idea of the boys calling someone else daddy." Hord pressed for Stephen's whereabouts. "Where is Stephen now?" "I don't know," the relative admitted. "The last time I saw him was when he left my place on Saturday night. He was still very upset and said he needed to get out somewhere to cool off." "Have you heard from him since then?" "Yes. He called me twice on Sunday evening after he heard about the murders," the relative replied. "I told him the law would probably want to talk to him, and he said he'd be glad to talk, but not until the next day. He called again later on Sunday and said he wouldn't be going back to his house. He thought it would be better if his whereabouts were unknown for a while." "Did he mention leaving town?" "No, he didn't say anything about leaving town." Hord paused for a moment before asking a crucial question. "Does Stephen own a 12-gauge shotgun?" The relative's answer was both revealing and alarming. "Stephen owns 3 shotguns. One of them is a 12-gauge. The other 2 are 20-gauge. He keeps them on a shelf in his bedroom closet." The new information heightened the urgency of the case. Early Tuesday morning, Hord secured a search warrant for Stephen Cheshire's St. Augustine home, specifically to locate the 12-gauge shotgun that matched the weapon used in the murders of Mary Cheshire and Darrell Durbin. The search turned up the 2 20-gauge shotguns mentioned by Stephen's relative, but the 12-gauge was nowhere to be found. The absence of the weapon added a chilling dimension to the investigation, raising the stakes as Hord considered the possibility that Stephen Cheshire had not only fled but might also still be armed. That afternoon, investigator Chris Hord secured a warrant for Stephen Cheshire's arrest on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The warrant was based on several damning factors: Cheshire's ownership of a 12-gauge shotgun, consistent with the murder weapon and now conspicuously missing from his home, critical information obtained through interviews, including his proximity to the scene of the crime during the estimated time of the killings, and his sudden disappearance from the area immediately afterward. The mounting evidence left little doubt in Hord's mind that Cheshire was the prime suspect. Working in coordination with Putnam County officials, Hord tracked Cheshire's movements and uncovered that the fugitive had fled to Carteret County, North Carolina. He was staying with a relative in a small town roughly 15 miles from the Atlantic coast. Records indicated that Cheshire had arrived there on Monday night, seeking refuge far from the escalating investigation in Florida. Hord reached out to Anthony Dennis, the chief of detectives at the Carteret County Sheriff's Office in Beaufort, providing details of the case and requesting Cheshire's immediate apprehension on the outstanding murder warrant. He also instructed Dennis to locate and impound the yellow Department of Transportation pickup truck that Cheshire had been driving. Hours later, as the day stretched into evening, Hord's phone rang. It was Dennis with an update. Stephen Edward Cheshire, 36, was taken into custody at 6:20 p.m., Dennis reported. We picked him up at the home of his relative here in North Carolina. Good work, Horde replied. What about the pickup? We've got that impounded as well, Dennis confirmed. Where is Cheshire now? He's being held at the county jail here in Beaufort, Dennis said. Horde wasted no time. I'll be heading to Beaufort immediately, he told Dennis, already preparing mentally for the trip. Before leaving, Horde phoned fellow investigator Keith Riddick, keeping his instructions brief. Be ready to accompany me to Beaufort in the next 30 minutes. With Cheshire in custody, the case had taken a decisive turn. Now, Horde would confront the man at the center of the investigation, hoping to uncover the final pieces of the puzzle and bring justice for Mary Cheshire and Darrell Durbin. The two investigators, Chris Horde and Keith Riddick, drove through the night, their focus unwavering as they made their way to Beaufort, North Carolina. By 7:45 the following morning, they arrived at the Carteret County Sheriff's Office. Without delay, Horde requested an interview with Stephen Cheshire, who was promptly brought over from the county jail and escorted to a small office adjacent to the booking desk. Horde firmly believed that interviews with murder suspects worked best when conducted on a personal, one-on-one basis, where the setting could foster a direct and candid exchange. He entered the room alone, leaving Riddick to await further instructions. Cheshire, appearing composed but wary, sat across from him. Horde wasted no time, informing Cheshire that he was under arrest on a first-degree Florida warrant for the murders of his estranged wife, Mary Cheshire, and her boyfriend, Darrell Durbin. He then methodically read Cheshire his Miranda rights. Cheshire responded cautiously. I don't want to make you mad, he began, but I believe I should ask for an attorney. Horde's expression remained neutral. That wouldn't make me mad at all, he replied evenly. Cheshire nodded. Then I believe I would like to invoke the right to counsel. Respecting his request, Horde refrained from pressing further about the murders. Instead, the two spoke for a few minutes about trivial topics, an informal exchange designed to maintain rapport. Then Horde shifted focus, asking Cheshire if he would be willing to sign a consent to search form for his pickup truck. Cheshire considered the request and agreed. I have no problem with that, he said. Horde called investigator Riddick into the room to witness the signature. As Riddick entered, Cheshire made an offhand comment unrelated to the formalities at hand. Actually, the truth of the matter is, I don't know what happened. I don't know where I was or what I did. Despite the potentially revealing nature of the statement, Horde adhered strictly to protocol. Since Cheshire had invoked his right to counsel, Horde chose not to follow up or probe further. With the consent to search form signed, Riddick left to assist the Carteret County Chief of Detectives in obtaining the necessary warrant to search the truck. Meanwhile, Cheshire returned to the subject of the murders, seemingly unable to keep it off his mind. Hypothetically speaking, he said, if I said I broke into the trailer and killed the two of them, I would automatically be convicted of first-degree murder, wouldn't I? Horde's response was measured, careful not to cross any legal boundaries. It would depend on a number of factors, he said. It's important to hear your side of the story, of course. If it were out in the open, people would probably be able to understand it. Perhaps at a later time, after you have talked it over with your attorney, you may be willing to make a formal statement. Cheshire seemed to consider the reply but offered no further comments. The room fell silent, the weight of unspoken words lingering as Horde wrapped up the interaction, knowing the path to uncovering the truth would be a long and methodical one. During the interview with Stephen Cheshire, investigator Chris Horde noticed the suspect was wearing loafers that matched the description given by Cheshire's girlfriend of the shoes he was wearing during his visit to her around 1 a.m. on Saturday, October 29th. Acting quickly, Hoard asked Cheshire if he would be willing to surrender the loafers for examination. Cheshire agreed without hesitation, slipping them off and handing them to the investigator. Back at the sheriff's office, Hoard learned that Carteret County's chief of detectives had already secured a warrant to search Cheshire's truck. Without delay, Hoard contacted the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, in Jacksonville and requested the assistance of a crime scene unit. Agent Alan Miller responded promptly, traveling to Beaufort to process the vehicle. When the search commenced, Miller, along with Hoard, Riddick, and Detective Anthony Dennis, made an alarming discovery. The old yellow pickup truck had been hastily painted black, an obvious attempt to alter its appearance. Several empty cans of black paint lay discarded in the truck bed. Further inspection revealed clothing that matched Cheshire's girlfriend's description of what he had been wearing on the night of the murders. Rolled into a ball, the investigators found a blood-stained t-shirt and a pair of jeans. Despite these significant findings, no weapon resembling the murder weapon, a 12-gauge shotgun, was located. Miller carefully photographed the vehicle and gathered the recovered evidence, including the loafers Hoard had obtained earlier. The FDLE agent transported the items back to Jacksonville for further forensic processing. On November 2nd, Stephen Cheshire appeared before a Carteret County judge and waived extradition to Florida. While investigator Hoard and Riddick needed time to complete investigative and legal preparations in Carteret County, they planned to escort Cheshire back to Palatka early Monday morning. The long drive back to Florida was uneventful, with the men making small talk about mundane topics like the weather. Cheshire remained silent about the murders until the trio crossed the Florida state line and stopped at a way station to use the restroom. As they returned to the vehicle, Cheshire broke his silence. "When will I get to talk to a lawyer?" he asked. Hoard responded plainly, "You'll have a public defender assigned at your first appearance tomorrow morning. He'll arrive to speak with you sometime after that." Upon their arrival in Palatka, Cheshire was booked into the Putnam County Jail. The next morning, during his first appearance, Circuit Judge Robert Perry ordered that Cheshire be held without bond. Public Defender Howard Pearl was appointed to represent him. The case against Cheshire began to solidify when the FDLE's forensic report arrived during the following week. Among the evidence sent from Beaufort, the loafers proved crucial. A comparison of the shoes with the footprint discovered outside the Durbin trailer revealed a striking match. The FDLE report stated, the shoe imprint found outside the Durbin trailer most likely came from a slip-on loafer belonging to the defendant. The report's footprint expert added further weight to the finding, writing, "In this case, my final conclusion was that the footwear track was most likely made by the defendant's right shoe." This breakthrough marked a turning point in the case, connecting Stephen Cheshire more definitively to the crime scene and tightening the web of evidence surrounding him. On November 21, 1988, a Putnam County grand jury needed only 20 minutes to unanimously indict 36-year-old Stephen Cheshire on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the brutal slayings of his estranged wife, Mary Cheshire, and her boyfriend, Darrell Durbin. The killings had taken place in Durbin's single-wide trailer in a Palatka mobile home community just weeks earlier, on October 29. In addition to the murder charges, Cheshire was indicted on 3 other felonies: burglary of a dwelling while armed, firing a weapon into an occupied dwelling, and criminal mischief. The criminal mischief charge stemmed from the slashing of all 4 tires on the cars belonging to Mary Cheshire and Darrell Durbin. In Florida, a conviction for first-degree murder left no middle ground. Cheshire faced either life in prison without parole or death in the electric chair. As the case moved toward trial, a pre-trial conference was held on February 2, 1989. At the hearing, Cheshire's court-appointed attorney, Howard Pearl, requested a postponement, citing insufficient time to prepare a thorough defense. Cheshire, however, was adamant about going to trial as quickly as possible. Judge Robert Perry addressed the defendant directly, warning him of the risks. "Do you understand," the judge asked, "that an early trial could hamper your defense if the attorney representing you is not fully prepared?" "Yes, sir," Cheshire replied firmly. "But I'm not guilty, and I don't think I should be in jail." Cheshire's insistence on moving forward brought Florida's speedy trial laws into play. Under these laws, a defendant can demand a trial within 180 days of arrest. This forced Judge Perry to reschedule both the pretrial and trial dates multiple times, balancing the legal requirements with the need to ensure a fair trial. The second pretrial hearing was eventually held on May 4, 1989. At the May hearing, prosecutor Steve Petrucco revealed that the state had offered Stephen Cheshire a plea deal. Under the terms of the agreement, the state was willing to drop the 2 first-degree murder charges if Cheshire pled guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and the 3 other charges tied to the killings. The plea deal could have spared Cheshire the possibility of a death sentence, but he rejected it outright. "He's refused the offer," Petrucco told the court. Cheshire remained resolute, continuing to proclaim his innocence and demanding his right to a speedy trial. The case was now set to move forward, with both sides preparing for the high-stakes legal battle that lay ahead. The trial of Stephen Cheshire began on May 22, 1989, nearly 7 months after the brutal murders of his estranged wife, Mary Cheshire, and her boyfriend, Darrell Durbin. The prosecution built its case meticulously, relying on evidence collected through interviews, eyewitness testimony placing Cheshire near the crime scene during the critical time window, and circumstantial evidence linking him to the murders. The state highlighted Cheshire's ownership of a 12-gauge shotgun, the type of weapon used in the killings, though the shotgun itself was never recovered. Prosecutors also focused on physical evidence found in Cheshire's possession, a blood-stained t-shirt and loafers described by witnesses as what he had been wearing on the night of the murders. A forensic expert from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement testified that the sole pattern of the right loafer matched a shoe print found outside the Durbin trailer. After 3 days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury began deliberations on May 25. Initially, they struggled to reach a unanimous decision. After 5 hours of discussion, the jurors broke for dinner and resumed deliberations in the evening. 3 hours later, they returned with a verdict. Stephen Cheshire was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the shotgun killings of Mary Cheshire and Darrell Durbin. The jury also convicted him of shooting into an occupied dwelling, burglary while armed, and criminal mischief for slashing the victim's tires. The following morning, the same jury reconvened to deliberate on sentencing. After less than 30 minutes, they recommended life imprisonment for each of the murder charges. On July 18, 1989, Circuit Judge Robert Perry delivered the final sentence, overriding the jury's life sentence recommendation for Mary Cheshire's murder. Perry imposed the death penalty for her killing, citing the brutal nature of the crime. For the murder of Darrell Durbin, Cheshire was sentenced to life in prison. Additional sentences included 9 years for shooting into an occupied dwelling and 7 years each for the burglary and criminal mischief charges. However, in September 1990, the Florida Supreme Court reviewed the case and overturned the death sentence for the murder of Mary Cheshire. The court ruled that Judge Perry improperly imposed the death penalty by failing to consider the jury's recommendation of life imprisonment and emotional factors tied to the crime. The court ordered the death sentence reduced to life imprisonment, stipulating that it run consecutively to the life sentence for the murder of Darrell Durbin. Under Florida's sentencing guidelines, Stephen Cheshire would not be eligible for parole for 50 years. On December 5, 1990, Cheshire was officially removed from death row and entered into the Florida prison system to begin serving his consecutive life sentences. The case, marked by its violent nature and legal complexities, came to a definitive close with Cheshire destined to remain behind bars for the remainder of his life. The story of Stephen Cheshire is one of betrayal, violence, and loss that shook a quiet community. 2 lives were senselessly taken, Mary Cheshire and Darrell Durbin, leaving behind grief and unanswered questions. Justice, though slow, was served, with Cheshire condemned to live out his days in prison, a stark reminder of the cost of unchecked rage. While the tragedy cannot be undone, the resilience of those left behind ensures that the victims are not forgotten, and the pursuit of justice stands as a testament to their memory.